India development debate. I'm Tamanna Inamdar, and the big headline of the day has all been about Donald Trump overnight putting in suspension H-1B visas and a plethora of other work visas. But in the Indian context, it's the H-1B visa that always hits the headlines and seems to strike a chord. Now, here's why. The H-1B visa for a long time has been to aspiring engineers and the brightest minds in our country a ticket to the American dream. On the other hand, it has also been the tool to strengthen India's formidable IT sector. But the fact is that over the last many years, India's IT sector has been sort of dealing with the new normal and the new reality of the Trump administration, reducing its dependence more and more on H-1B visas. Nevertheless, 70% of H-1B visas, which are for highly skilled individuals, are still cornered by Indians. So what does this move of Donald Trump really mean? Should we even be surprised considering it comes just months before an election and the election rhetoric is only set to get more stronger and bitter? And what is the big picture here as far as the American dream is concerned? To speak on this and a lot of other issues, I'm joined today by Arvind Thakur, former VC and MD of NIIT Technologies. I'm speaking with Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director of the Woodrow Wilson Institute. And of course, I'm pleased to speak today with Meera Shankar, former ambassador to the USA. Welcome to all of you and great to speak with all of you. Mr. Thakur, I just want your perspective. I mean, we had a statement today from Nasscom, and in fact, in a bit from now, we'll be playing out for our viewers what the current Nasscom chief has also said, which was a bit of worry, a bit of consternation. But generally, the message from the IT industry and from the government of India has been that, yes, this is wrong, we will protest, but it's not going to harm us much.
That's right, Tamanna. I think if you really look at the context right now, there is no mobility of people at all.
Yes.
So besides, the embassies not operating and giving visas, even the airlines are not flying. And so, in a sense, this move is coming at a time when, in any case, there is no mobility of talent. So from that perspective, in the short term, it really does not impact the industry in any manner, simply because the industry has adjusted to this new normal, which was being created by the COVID crisis. So, that's perhaps one of the main reasons why you don't see any concern at this point in time from the industry. But yes, it's an issue which is bothersome simply because it is going to impact the US economy per se. Now, the reason why the visas have been, this promulgation has taken place is to create more jobs, hopefully, by preventing other people from coming to the country. But the fact remains that if you really look at data points and you look at unemployment numbers, the tech sector particularly, the unemployment rate was as low as 3%. And in fact, in the last 3 months, the unemployment rate is actually reduced to 2.5%. So what the US economy is really going to experience is pain because there is a dearth of technical resources. And by preventing people from coming, it will impede the recovery of the economy.
Well, just to be clear, the ban is not only for H-1B. Like I said in the beginning, that's the one that catches our eye and catches the headline. The question is, what is going to be India's sort of diplomatic response? Let me just take you through what came from government sources today, saying that, the new policy is not going to impact existing H-1B visa holders in the US. It can result in a shortage of skilled workforce there, which skilled Indians in the US will benefit from. So that's an interesting take. And also a take that, really skilled Indians who are going to the US can stay back here and help the Indian economy, so no brain drain. Though, of course, it came with the point that this will be taken up. Meera Shankar, do you think that this is an issue on top of India's mind right now diplomatically? Because clearly we seem to have given up on the whole H-1B question in the Trump era. We forged ahead with his relationship in a lot of ways on Trump's terms. And he's been pretty clear how he feels about H-1B.
The Indian companies have been adjusting the way in which they operate, given that President Trump's proclivity towards protectionism on skilled movement of skilled workers was well known since he took office. So most of our companies have adjusted by hiring more American talent, opening offices in the US or near shore in countries like Mexico or Canada. But clearly, this is something which is worrisome, if only because of the sentiment or intent behind it. Right now, as Mr. Thakur said, in this period where mobility in any case has been restricted because of the COVID crisis, it may not have a material impact. Of course, Nasscom has requested that the prohibition or the suspension of the program should be limited to 3 months rather than extended all the way to December. Whether this is going to find receptive ears, I think, is questionable because the presidential elections in the US are in November. But the interesting thing is that many US business associations, research associations, universities have also written to the president expressing concern over the suspension of the program, whether it's the US Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, whether it is large companies such as Google, the Association of Universities, all have actually expressed concern that their functioning will be impacted adversely through the suspension of this program. And it might come as an interesting side issue right now to mention that a lot of our companies are working with US hospitals, US medical institutions in this crisis.
Yes.
And also with companies which are actually researching and working on an anti-COVID vaccine. If you look at the 8 US companies which are developing an anti-COVID vaccine, then many of them have got very significant inputs through the H-1B visa program. So as Nasscom said, they described it as misguided. And, I would say that I'm disappointed, but not surprised.
Yes. I think you make a very good point, Ambassador Shankar, that we think about H-1B in the context of software engineers, but it's a whole range of highly skilled professionals. And like I said, this is beyond H-1B. So we have to see what this does to those, graduating from universities or hoping to move on after their education in the US and secure some kind of work. There's that whole range of issues which comes into play. Michael Kugelman, joining us all the way from DC today. I want to understand the context of it, because if you see the White House statement, the decision is pitched in the context of what has been happening in the US economy after COVID-19. Simply put, it says a lot of jobs have been lost. We need to protect local jobs. And hence, let's stop people coming in for now, at least till December. I want to understand if this is something that is going to go down well with voters. It's all well and good for YouTube and Google and Elon Musk to say that this doesn't work. At the end of the day, doesn't this really, call to Trump's voter base?
Well, yes, I think that it's quite clear that the main motivation for Trump's executive order is essentially domestic political considerations. And I think that there's a perfect storm that's developed here that's ensured that you have this move now, one that had been thought would happen for quite some time, but is only happening now. One is that you have the pandemic, which has caused catastrophic job losses in the US. I mean, we've had some of the worst unemployment figures that we've had in decades, even going back to the Great Depression. Additionally, Trump has never been more vulnerable politically, I would argue, both because of his handling of the pandemic, but also because of his perceived handling of the protests about police brutality and racism that we've had here in the U.S. over the last few weeks. And finally, of course, as we know, there's an election coming up. And, for President Trump, the issue of jobs has always been a huge political issue, as it is for any American political candidate and politicians anywhere. So I think in that regard, now is the time to come out with this executive order that is pitched in a way that suggests that American jobs will be saved and will be benefited. Of course, it's an argument that could certainly be refuted. But to your point about voters, it's interesting that there has been a fair amount of bipartisan support in the U.S. for a reforming of the H-1B visa process. I mean, this is not just a Trump thing. This is not just a Republican thing. There has been support on both sides of the political aisle. And given how difficult the times here are in the United States now with the economic situation, I imagine that this type of thing would get a lot of support. But to be sure, I don't want to overgeneralize. There are plenty of Americans that believe that this is just going to make America worse by denying the country from getting high-skilled labor that could do very important things that could strengthen an economy that really needs to recover in a very big way. And there are also, as you noted, it's not just H-1B visas that are affected here. J-1 visas, which are awarded to foreign scholars and people that are given an opportunity to come study here as visiting fellows and professors. That's, I think, could be a big blow. Now, of course, as we've noted, the blow will be blunted for the reasons that have been mentioned, but also this executive order, as I understand it, is only for 6 months. So it's essentially only through the end of the year. And when it ends, there'll be a new president, who may be Trump and maybe Biden.
No, but that's the point. That's the point, Michael. Does it necessarily change if there is a new president? Because right now we don't know what's going to happen. So in one scenario, you have Trump coming back with no real reason to sort of blunt this decision or dilute it in any way. And what do you think is Joe Biden and the Democrats' position?
Well, I imagine that Joe Biden would not be in a rush to issue an executive order like this if he were to be president. I don't see that happening. But again, as I had said before, there has been a fair amount of bipartisan support for reforming these visa programs. If the economic situation in the United States continues to be very bad come early January, if you have a President Biden taking office in the White House, then certainly you couldn't rule out efforts to not necessarily ban the issuance of new H-1B visas or anything like that, but there could certainly be motivations to try to reform the system in a way that would be perceived not to imperil U.S. jobs as much. But I think that President Trump has taken things to the extreme by outright banning the issuing of new visas like this for the remainder of the year. I don't see a President Biden taking steps that would be quite as drastic.
Ms. Meera Shankar, just your point on that has there been a sort of a paradigm shift in the U.S. approach to these kind of visas and not just H-1B, and something that even a Democrat president wouldn't completely walk back on?
Well, on the issue of immigration, the Democrats have certainly, contested President Trump's approach. But because they believe that skilled immigration helps the United States. On the movement of skilled workers to the US in a non-immigrant fashion through the H-1B, L-1 or other programs, I think the Democrats have also been under protectionist pressure from the working class in the US. You notice that during, President Obama's time, there were several statements about losing jobs from Boston to Bangalore and so on. And also the increase in H-1B processing fees, visa fees, to pay for enhanced security on the US border with Mexico, which had nothing to do with the H-1B visa program, was passed very suddenly, added to the finance bill during President Obama's time. So there is pressure on both sides, and the Republicans as well as the Democrats, to be more restrictive about the H-1B visa program. But equally, there's pressure from corporate America that the program is essential. Otherwise, it hits their competitiveness. So I think somewhere between these two positions, you might see a potential President Biden carving out an H-1B visa policy. Now, this suspension has been done by President Trump under an executive order. It's not US law as yet. So it lapses automatically at the end of December because it's valid till the end of the calendar year, unless it is extended by the new president. But my guess would be that they would try to rework the H-1B visa process. And President Trump's administration has also hinted at it by saying in the longer term, they want to change the process by not having a lottery system for allotment of H-1B visas, because always the applications and petitions are far more than the annual number of visas which are issued, which are 65,000 for skilled professionals and another 20,000 for postgraduate students who have studied at US universities. So, but they would rather give the visas on a priority basis to those who will earn higher wages in the
Yes.
So that itself actually would act as a restriction and to some extent be a non-competitive practice vis-a-vis Indian companies, because what it does is to try to take the edge off their competitiveness, which is skilled manpower, which is available at a cheaper rate. Though most of our H-1Bs in the US actually earn of an amount which is way beyond the minimum which has been prescribed in the H-1B visa program. So there could be pressure to increase that minimum ceiling for the H-1B program. There could be pressure to change the processes. But my sense is it may not stay suspended in the long run unless the US situation is so dire that, political compulsions kick in.
Well, the way that Indian IT companies have been dealing with this is also increasing its amount of localization. Arvind, why don't you take us through that? Will it really pinch at this point when we've come to a scenario of, work from home or remote kind of working? Do you think that the H-1B will continue to be a very important tool for Indian IT companies?
Well, it's definitely an important tool. But as Ambassador Shankar said, the industry has evolved its business model anticipating, issues, because this is a sensitive issue for any president. So therefore, you would have seen over the years, the business model of IT companies have evolved. It's not just hiring locally. They have increased automation, for example. They have set up nearshore facilities, not just in neighboring countries, but within the United States itself. There are pockets where you can get very good talent at cost-effective, rates. So the industry is evolving, and the phenomena of working from home is actually a very interesting phenomena because it completely decouples. It's shown the world that you can completely decouple talent from where they're located and deliver a great service. So I'm sure, all these constraints which keep coming with respect to mobility of people would be addressed adequately by the industry, which has evolved over the years.
But beyond the industry, Arvind, what does it do to the American dream? What does it do to the Forge, the army of software engineers from India, changing their lives because of that H-1B visa? Do you think the lure of that American dream has dimmed?
Well, it's definitely not the same as it was, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, because I think economies around the world have also developed and evolved. The quality of life that you can experience in India today as compared to what you would have experienced, let's say, 25 or 30 years ago, is very different. So, when you talk about the American dream, it's relative. And, there are many positives with respect to remaining where you are and being able to deliver services anywhere in the world. I think things have changed considerably. And it's not just, a professional desire to kind of go and live somewhere else in the world. He would much prefer being, with a social environment which he or she is comfortable with and deliver services across the world.
Okay. Now, I mean, the huge number of applications still for, H-1B visas recently show that, yes, people are very excited. But the broader question there, Meera Shankar, about the lure of the American dream in the context of H-1B visas going to get tougher, not easier, even if a suspension or a ban is lifted. And also, do you think that the Indian government right now wants to utilize its political goodwill with the Trump administration talking about H-1B? Or is everyone just going to wait and see what happens in November?
I think right now, since the physical situation on the ground has restricted movement in any case, and we really don't know when it will be possible to ease those restrictions. I think it's not impacting in a very major way beyond what the COVID crisis has already done. I think our companies need to look much more at doing more work in India itself, offshoring, outsourcing in India itself, so that you can you can address some of these issues in a way which will actually redound to your benefit in the long run, because the more development you are able to do from here, the more it benefits your economy. Secondly, I would say that as far as the American dream is concerned, I think, there are, it is a more protectionist US. And I think this is something which will outlast the Trump administration. It's not just an individual proclivity of President Trump, but there are larger forces behind this, and you are going to see a less open US in the future. But it still remains, a big lure for Indians, though many are now going to Australia and Canada, Canada in particular, which is more open. And you will see American companies increasing employment in India to do more work here, or in countries like Canada, where they may open more offices to get around some of these problems. So I think in the long run, economic compulsions will have to be balanced by the US against political compulsions. And they will probably strive to find some policy in between these two compulsions, though all efforts till now in the US Congress to reform the H-1B visa process have failed to find, or the visa and immigration process overall have failed to find consensus, and which is why actually you see President Trump increasingly having recourse to executive orders.
Michael, as we approach November and the presidential elections, do you see things getting worse in terms of the anti-immigrant, and American jobs for Americans rhetoric?
Yes, unfortunately, I do. President Trump knows that he's, as I said before, never been more vulnerable politically, and he's going to need to go all out and pull out all the stops to appeal to his rank and file and to his core base, particularly because I think a lot of traditional fence sitters, independents, conservative Democrats, liberal Republicans are not going to give Trump the benefit of the doubt this time around and may be inclined to vote for the Democrat. So unfortunately, I do think that we will see President Trump resorting to some of the really ugly xenophobic type of rhetoric that unfortunately won him a lot of support with the rank of file that he really needs to come out en masse to vote on election day. So, I think that's very troubling. So it's going to be ugly rhetorically in terms of what we hear in the campaign trail from President Trump. President candidate Biden has been very different in the sense that he has been very careful. I think that he's made it very clear that he's not going to stoop down to the level of President Trump, and he wants to run a positive campaign and talk about hope, much like Barack Obama did some years ago. So I don't think you're going to see Biden getting down in the mud, so to speak, with Trump. Though, of course, once they face off in presidential debates and things like that, it could get ugly. But Joe Biden's message will be very different from what you hear from President Trump. And final note, I think that the point about the American dream, for me, one of the things that is concerning about this executive order and some of the other policies coming from President Trump is that it impacts soft power. I mean, U.S. soft power has been so strong for so long. You would have, many people living in countries that are very hostile to America. You could have people that will go out in a protest and shout anti-American slogans, but then they'll happily go to a U.S. consulate or embassy and apply for a visa to come to the U.S. to visit or to live there. And I think given what's happened in recent months, that could certainly change it. I just don't know if you would have as many people wanting to come to the U.S., even if they don't agree with U.S. policy, they like to come. And as Ambassador Shankar said before, you've had a number of people going to other countries, staying away from the United States. And I think that is really something that's rather unfortunate.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael, Arvind, and of course, Ambassador Shankar, for speaking with us on this very, very important issue. It also shows you that no matter which country, when it comes to elections, sometimes there's always an effort to pander to our basest instincts. We have to see which ones win out finally. Thank you so much for joining us today. So what has Nasscom, India's Apex Association of IT companies, been saying about the H-1B visa suspension? ET Now spoke exclusively with UB Praveen Rao, who's a Nasscom chairman and COO of tech giant Infosys. Listening.
It's very unfortunate. It's in fact misguided and harmful to the American companies. It actually prevents not only member companies of Nasscom, but also thousands of corporations in US access to critical talent overseas, which is very pivotal in dealing with post-COVID crisis and post-COVID recovery of American economy. So from that perspective, it's a bit short-sighted decision. In fact, thousands of corporations, including technology giants like Amazon, Facebook, Google, either individually or through their associations like US Chamber of Commerce, had earlier written to President Trump requesting him not to do anything which is harmful for the US economy. But it's unfortunate that they have taken this decision. Overall, as you rightly said, in the last few years, our member companies have invested significantly in hiring local talent. To that extent, it is mitigated. But end of the day, this is all about skills. It's all about access to talent wherever it resides. And particularly in the post-COVID recovery, we expect technology to play a critical role, technology spend to increase, and there is a dearth of talent. In fact, while there is overall unemployment in US, unemployment in the tech sector, as per the April numbers, is 2.8% only. So net, while we are much better off than we were in the past,
Right.
we'll always have the need to access critical talent elsewhere, and this unfortunately prevents us from doing so in a very effective manner.
It seems to be about looking inwards for a lot of countries and economies around the world. So if America is looking to keep jobs for Americans, India wants Indians to buy what's made in India. And getting e-commerce companies to display country of origin could be one way. More on that big story unfolding after this break.